Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. The story begins on Christmas Eve at the home of a boy named Jack O'Malley. In exchange for some candy, he shows his cousins where the presents are already hidden, proving that Santa Claus is a hoax. His uncle tries to convince him otherwise, but Jack is so skeptical that he even eats the snack reserved for the jolly old man. Decades later, we see that he continues to take what isn't his. Additionally, his job as a hacker sometimes involves bypassing the security of a building, as is the case today. Jack starts a fire and takes advantage of the chaos to steal an ID badge. Then we meet Agent Callum Drift, a very honest and responsible man. The only thing he has in common with Jack is the lack of Christmas spirit. When a nice family offers cookies to Santa, he abruptly takes the tin to check the contents. Then a very rude influencer tries to cut in front of the children to make a video. Callum gets close to him to say he can't cut the line, making the size difference between the two clear. The young man quickly agrees to wait his turn. On the way to the exit, Santa laments that Callum is about to retire. The two get into a vehicle under escort while several agents coordinate the operation, referring to Santa as Red One. He is taken to a warehouse where his reindeer are already waiting. When the control tower releases the takeoff, they run down the snowy runway until the sleigh takes flight and soon breaks the sound barrier. As has become evident, this is the Real Saint Nicholas, who only spent the afternoon at the mall to connect closely with his audience. Meanwhile, Jack receives an alert about seismic activity and immediately notifies one of his clients, a mysterious guy who uses a voice filter. The client wants the coordinates of the location and Jack negotiates in advance to release the information. When the sleigh arrives at the North Pole, we see how Grand Santa's hidden realm is, a large, illuminated city. Moments later, Callum approaches Chief Nicholas and hands in his retirement request. Nicholas tries to persuade him to change his mind, appealing to his love for children, but Callum insists that the problem is with adults. Furthermore, the greatest proof that the world is getting worse is the infamous naughty list, which is now longer than the nice list. Nicholas reminds him that there is always a child inside every adult, but Callum is too disillusioned to see things that way. Outside the Christmas complex, we see a group of people searching the North Pole. When one of them hits his forehead against the invisible dome, the leader orders them to start digging a hole. Inside, Callum is enjoying his last moments in the Christmas complex. Seeing a light that seems to be malfunctioning, he calls a colleague on the radio and asks someone to check it. When other lights begin to fail and his colleague stops responding, Callum realizes something is wrong. The security team begins a sweep and no one can locate Nicholas. In the room, Callum finds signs of a struggle and reaches the balcony just in time to see the kidnapper's vehicle leaving. Jumping from high up, he runs after them while mobilizing his team on the radio. This starts a chaotic chase through the village streets. Callum slides down the tubes that transport the presents and hitches a ride on a drone, landing right on top of the criminal's car, but is forced to jump when he reaches a bridge. Then it's time to use his impressive toys, such as the transformation ray that enlarges any miniature to real size. Properly empowered, Callum continues tracking the intruders beyond the dome while dodging avalanches. Unfortunately, he can only reach the vehicle when its occupants have already switched transport. Returning to the complex, Callum talks to Zoe Harlow. She is the director of the Mythological Division, a secret organization that protects magical beings. She says that the seismic monitoring system was hacked a few hours before the kidnapping. The one responsible was a hacker known as Wolf, who claims to be able to locate anything or anyone. They still don't know that the wolf in question is actually Jack O'Malley. After blowing his payment on drinks and sleeping in the bathtub, he wakes up to Olivia's call. She is the mother of his son Dylan and can't pick him up today. With great effort, she convinces him to pick the boy up at school despite his hangover. Dylan seems to have inherited some traits from his father. He is in trouble at school for improperly altering the attendance records. Before getting out of the car, the boy, who is going to participate in a Christmas play that night, hopes that his father will attend. But as Jack laughs and starts making jokes, Dylan pretends that he also thinks these things are ridiculous. On the way home, Jack notices he is being followed by a group of thugs disguised as guards and workers. By the shadow on the ground, he sees that the thugs are already inside the apartment too, so the only way out is to fight. They have stunning weapons that practically shut down a person on the spot, but Jack manages to use them against the enemies themselves. After neutralizing them all, he sees that more of them are coming up the stairs and decides to escape through the window. Thinking he has succeeded in throwing them off his trail, he sneaks through the neighborhood alleys until he runs into Zoe, who paralyzes him. Jack wakes up at home, tied to a chair and surrounded by agents. He confesses to hacking the monitoring system and selling the information, but explains that his clients are anonymous and he doesn't even know the purpose of his tasks for security reasons. Indignant at his lack of character, Zoe orders the agents to pack up the prisoner. Jack is scared until he realizes the order is literal. He is taken to the mythological division inside a huge box, chair and all. Zoe briefly explains the work of the mythological division and Jack reacts with sarcasm until he sees the headless knight and his horse being detained. Telling him about the kidnapping, she takes the opportunity to introduce Callum and Agent Garcia, who is a polar bear. Callum is furious and says the hacker is on level 4 of the naughty list. Jack starts to laugh upon hearing this, but a strong hug from Garcia shows that these people are not kidding around. Jack swears he doesn't know the client's identity but can find out their location if they return his cell phone. He then says the person is in Aruba and agrees to track them for a generous amount. Zoe agrees, but only after inserting a tracker into Jack himself. Meanwhile, Nicholas is imprisoned in a suspended cage, talking to the kidnapper. Showing that she also stole his list, she says she will use it to make the world a better place. Then she adjusts a control that fills the cage with a green substance, putting Nicholas to sleep. Callum takes Jack shopping and reveals that all the toy stores are secretly connected to each other. Jack doesn't understand why they're wasting time with toy cars when they should be arranging some transportation until Callum uses the transformation ray and he is stunned to see a real car parked in front of him. Meanwhile, the kidnapper of Santa finishes the prototype of her special weapon, which looks a lot like a snow globe. She decides to test its effectiveness on the first person on the naughty list, a man named Aaron Abel. In Aruba, Jack shows his investigative skills, demonstrating how to detect the worst characteristics of any person. If Callum was already disillusioned with humanity, this outing doesn't improve the situation much. But at least the exercise pays off quickly and Jack identifies the man who hired him. He is surrounded by tough security guards, but that doesn't seem to intimidate Callum. The agent goes straight to the first guard and demands to speak with the boss, already warning that he will only count to 5. Astonished by his boldness, the thugs charge at him. They don't know what they are dealing with until Callum reduces his own size to dodge a punch, which ends up hitting another thug. He then alternates between sizes as needed, always catching the others by surprise. Even when he is smaller, the magic gauntlet on his right arm ensures that his strength remains the same. He even manages to lift one of the men and use him to hit the others. All the guards are already down when a boss named Ted arrives. Fearing that Callum will attack him too, Jack interrupts the conversation to use more subtle talents, as he suspects that Ted is just a middleman. He becomes terrified as soon as Jack identifies himself as the wolf. The information he bought from him yesterday was passed on to a client who doesn't forgive slips. Ted claims that he can't even say her name without her hearing, so Callum forces him to write it in the sand. Not understanding the situation, Jack reads the name aloud, Gryla. That's how we discover the name of the kidnapper. Gryla is the Christmas witch who has always wanted to change traditions, punishing the naughty instead of rewarding the nice. Speaking through Ted, she admits to having kidnapped Nicholas and even tells part of her plans. Gryla intends to punish all the people who have ever been on the naughty list, whether they are a serial killer or just someone who littered once. Callum observes that this would leave very few people out, but she doesn't care. Zoe is also listening to the conversation and decides to send in backup teams. On the beach, tourists are startled when an ice cream truck emerges from the ocean playing Christmas music. Everyone watches in total suspense as the vehicle stops. Then the back door suddenly opens, allowing 3 monstrous snowmen to emerge. Launching flakes that freeze the victim upon contact, the icy trio spreads terror throughout the resort. Callum fights one of them while Jack tries to defend himself from another with appliances. Even when cut in half, the snowmen just reassemble and continue fighting. Ted hides for a long time, but when the third snowman finds him, he ends up turning into a popsicle. Unintentionally, Callum discovers the trick to defeating the Christmas aberrations. By removing the carrot nose, the rest of the snowman collapses, turning back into a pile of snow. Jack manages to get rid of his when he blows up the kiosk, but he himself ends up in the pool with the impact, and the remaining snowman starts to freeze the water. Swimming furiously to the edge, Jack almost manages to get out but gets his foot trapped under the ice. The snowman approaches with murderous intentions and is almost upon him when Callum pulls the carrot. Elsewhere in the world, Aaron Abel is getting a ticket while arguing with his relatives on the phone. When he opens the car door, there is a mysterious gift on the seat, a snow globe with his name engraved on the base. As soon as Aaron touches the object, a blue light fills the inside of the car and it even starts to snow. Suddenly, the phenomenon stops, and we see that Aaron seems to have disappeared. One of Gryla's sons, disguised as a traffic guard, checks that there was a problem, as the globe was supposed to have returned to the witch. Very angry, she demands that they fix the failure immediately. When Zoe arrives in Aruba, she shows images of Gryla at the North Pole, but Callum warns Jack that she won't always look like that. Both the witch and her children are all shapeshifters and can take on various different forms. Looking for records of magic misuse, the agents find a recent incident in Germany. That's where Krampus, Nicholas's adopted brother, lives. Zoe doesn't like the idea of invading his territory because he has a peace agreement with the mythological division, but Callum convinces her it's worth a try. Traveling through toy stores, Jack and Callum arrive in Germany in minutes. Then Olivia calls and says Dylan is sad because Jack won't attend his performance, which is at 7 o'clock tonight. He replies that it's impossible to get there in time, but she has no reason to believe that this time it's true. Seeing the expression on Callum's face, Jack tries to justify himself, claiming that associating with a criminal hacker would be worse for his son, but it's clear that the agent doesn't buy that. Arriving at their destination, he explains more the background between Nicholas and his brother. The two used to work together until Krampus created the naughty list and started to apply punishments. Furthermore, he also dated Gryla for many years, but the romance ended badly. Before entering Krampus's territory, Callum warns Jack not to touch anything at all for his own safety. The entrance is through a portal disguised as a mausoleum, and the landscape on the other side is even more macabre than the cemetery. When the gargoyles start to move, Callum calmly explains that they are beasts from hell. Jack's first test is a fountain full of gold coins, and he fails terribly. Putting one in his pocket, he is immediately captured by beastly guardians. They confiscate Callum's magic gauntlet and throw both of them into a cell. Once again, Jack tries to justify his actions, saying he just wanted to pay his debts. Callum cuts the talk off and states categorically that we always have a choice. Then the two are taken to Krampus, who is having fun with his traditional slap challenge. He denies any involvement in the kidnapping of his brother but admits that the witch visited him recently. Gryla came to ask for back an object called Glaskafig, which looks like a snow globe but hides a horrible punishment. Callum begs Krampus to help him find Nicholas before midnight, but the tyrant not only refuses but announces that Callum is now his prisoner. He tells Jack to return to the mythological division and warn that this is the price for the breach of the agreement between them. Knowing that Jack is not reliable, Callum has little hope that he will help him. But, to his surprise, Jack does not take the chance to escape. Instead, he says that Callum was bragging about being much better than Krampus in the slap challenge. Claiming to be an incorrigible gambler, which isn't a lie, Jack proposes a duel. If Callum loses, Krampus can imprison them both forever. But if he wins, the duo can leave. Krampus simply loves the idea, thrilled with the visitor's foolishness. The judge announces the start of the challenge and Callum slaps the host in the face with all his might, shocking the audience little. Then it's Krampus's turn, and he knocks the agent to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Then Jack pretends to accidentally bump into one of the guardians, and when Callum starts to gather his strength for the second round, he suddenly grabs his arm and returns his magic gauntlet that he just stole. Finally landing a slap worthy of him, Krampus realizes that the game has turned. Besides the strength, Callum also recovers the transformation ray. He uses it to multiply his allies and spread chaos throughout the castle, facilitating their escape before Krampus could catch them. Exiting the mausoleum, Callum thanks Jack for his supportive attitude, recognizing that he may have judged him wrongly. Then the two begin to plan their next steps, and Jack inadvertently says Gryla's name. She hears him but decides not to act immediately, telling her children that she has an idea about the next test. In the car, Callum explains that the Glascafig is a magical cage, but it only has room for one person at a time. If her plan is to penalize the whole world, she would have to produce billions of units. The conversation is interrupted by a piano playing by itself in the middle of the road. On top of the lid, there's a gift addressed to Jack. While Callum opens the box, finding a Glascafig, Jack receives a call from his son. Very upset, Dylan says that his father doesn't need to make up for his absence with silly gifts. Jack doesn't know what he is talking about until the boy shows the Glascafig. Dylan disappears shortly after touching the globe, and Jack becomes so desperate that he immediately grabs his. Before vanishing, he asks Callum to find him. Gryla is pleased to see Jack and Dylan on her shelf. Each Glascafig captured its naughty child and returned to her as planned. Starting the mass production of the globes, Gryla announces that her collection will be complete the next morning when all the naughty children in the world open their presents. Meanwhile, Callum calls Zoe with a theory. Since no one really saw Gryla leaving the North Pole, she may have staged the entire escape. By keeping Nicholas prisoner, she may be using his magic to operate the toy factory, which is the only place in the world with the production capacity she needs. The only flaw in this theory is that Zoe has been talking to the North Pole staff since the kidnapping. They would have noticed if something like that were happening. So Callum asks to talk to Mrs. Claus. She says she is preparing desserts for when Nicholas returns, and the agent converses with her in a very gentle tone. But as soon as the conversation ends, he says that Nicholas hates the dessert she mentioned, and the real Mrs. Claus wouldn't make that mistake. Remembering that Gryla's children are also shapeshifters, Zoe and Callum deduce that the Christmas complex is in enemy hands. Meanwhile, the false Mrs. Claus warns her accomplices that the division has discovered the plot. Unable to trust anyone, Zoe and Callum go to the North Pole and consult Jack's tracker. They discover that the globes are being made in the original factory, which is underground. On the shelf, Jack explains the situation to Dylan and takes full responsibility for the mess. He acknowledges that he has done many wrong things, but the worst of all is what he has failed to do as a father. As the two talk and understand each other, the glass of the Glascafig starts to crack. Gryla still doesn't know this, but the cage isn't eternal. It can dissolve if the naughty child in question changes their attitude. As soon as the globe breaks, the two return to their normal size and hug. Zoe and Callum arrive right after, and Jack tells them that Gryla intends to personally deliver the globes. Hearing this, Callum immediately figures out where Nicholas is, as the sleigh doesn't lift off without him. Then Dylan warns that something is trying to get out of the safe. Callum opens the door and finds Garcia, Mrs. Claus, and all the division agents who had been imprisoned. Arriving at the surface, they find the witch ready to leave and Nicholas still unconscious in the cage. Gryla begins to pilot the sleigh while her children fight with the agents. Jack and Callum manage to reach her, but the witch notices them and quickly grabs them, throwing them away. When the dome begins to open, Jack is being dragged by the reindeer. He starts kicking the chains with all his strength until he separates the sleigh, which falls onto the runway. With the impact, the villainous Gryla is thrown out of it and falls from the bridge. Callum takes the opportunity to pull Nicholas out of the cage. He begins to come to his senses when a gigantic ogre emerges from the precipice, revealing the true form of the witch. Jack and Callum refuse to abandon Nicholas even knowing they won't defeat the monstrous enemy. But as she moves to crush the two, a fireball hits her. Changing her mind at the last moment, Krampus decides to defend his brother. The ex-couple faces off in a titanic duel while the other two help as best they can. When Gryla grabs Callum and threatens to throw him off the bridge, Nicholas calls his reindeer to attack her. After receiving a few blows, Gryla falls into the tank of snow globes and ends up trapped in her own Glascafig. After the victory, Nicholas invites Jack and Dylan to join him in delivering the presents. We finally discover his secret: he takes the gifts as miniatures and shrinks himself to fit down the chimneys. On Christmas morning, Callum sees Jack talking to Dylan, and this time he can see the child that still exists within him. This realization prompts him to change his mind about early retirement.